So the Invest in Kids Act was something that the state of Illinois legislature got right. And they passed this back in 2017. And basically this act allows for you to donate to private schools. And for every dollar you donate, you get a 75-cent tax credit back from your Illinois taxes. So why would we want to do this? Or how does this work, I guess? The scholarships that are awarded by this money are given on a need basis, right? So only certain people qualify for these scholarships, and these scholarships are provided through what are called scholarship granting organizations. And so that's where Empower Illinois comes in. It's a scholarship granting organization, and they take care of all the procedures. They take care of soliciting the donations. They take care of collecting the information for those who qualify for scholarships, and take care of distributing scholarships. You don't actually donate to St. Jude. You actually donate to Empower Illinois. And then you get Empower Illinois turns around and donates out to the schools based on the qualifications of the people applying. The other great thing about Empower Illinois is you can designate your donation to a specific school. You cannot designate it to a specific student or person, but you can designate it to a specific school. So in this case, we could designate it to St. Jude, or you could designate it to Peoria or to any other school. So I want to just kind of say why would I donate to Empower Illinois, or why would I take advantage of the Invest in Kids Act? So the first reason, of course, is because it allows students to go get a Catholic education, in our case, or a private education. Students that wouldn't normally have that opportunity. Here at St. Jude, this program, so again, started back in 2018. The first year it happened, we were able to give full or partial scholarships to 12 students at St. Jude. This year, we were able to provide scholarships for 35 students going to St. Jude. So what that means in dollars is that's about $100,000. Scholarships that have been awarded to students to go to St. Jude. So that's a really great thing. That allows students and families that normally wouldn't get an opportunity to go to St. Jude to go to St. Jude. Probably another big benefit is that nobody wants to turn away a student from an education, especially a Catholic education. So a lot of times these students will find ways to help supplement them to get them into Catholic education. So when we get money from Empower Illinois, that's money that doesn't have to come out of the parish. So it's a direct benefit. So it's a great thing to do, and probably the best reason to do it is because of that tax credit. I like to say that I call it the efficiency of the donation, right? So for every dollar you donate, you get 75 cents back. So for example, if you give $1,000 to Empower Illinois, you go file your taxes the next year, you get $750 back. So really for a $250 out of pocket, you've given the school $1,000 to help somebody go to education. So it's a 4 times multiplier on your gift. And since Empower Illinois is a 501c organization, they qualify in most cases as a matching gift company with like Caterpillar or something from those other companies. So if you give $1,000 to Empower Illinois, you match $1,000 with your matching gift. You just give them $2,000 to your school of designation for out of pocket of $250. So an 8x multiplier. So it's almost like, why wouldn't I do this, right? If you want to help a school out, it makes a lot of sense. Really make your money go far. So that's my commercial. That's my plug. If you want to learn more about how to donate to Empower Illinois, we got some forms back there. Jill has some. It's a little complicated process. You got to get an ID on the myillinois.tax website. It takes a few days. It's snail mail to get your ID. Once you get that, then you can go online and reserve your tax credit. There is a cap, I think, of $75 million in the whole program. So if you reach that, then you can't get your tax credit anymore. I don't think we've reached that yet. And there are some designations in certain areas and certain schools and certain things you have to make sure you take care of so the money is in the right place. We have lots of information. Jill can help you. I can help you try to navigate that process. It's not really that hard. I've been doing it the last couple of years. And once you do it the first time, it gets really easy to do it the second one. So anyway, that's my plug. So donate to Empower.
Thank you, Scott, for talking about a program that helps so many of our students. So up next, we're really excited excited to have Dr. Barb Toohill with us today. So Dr. Toohill has experience working in private practice and inpatient hospital settings with individuals across the lifespan, providing both therapy and psychological and neuropsychological assessments. She has worked as a school-based counselor with children and adolescents and has presented research on infertility counseling and natural family planning. She is a 2013 recipient of the Top Doctor in Illinois by Health Tap, and Dr. Toohill, her husband Nick, and their children live here in Peoria and are members at Holy Family Parish. So thank you, Dr. Toohill, for being with us tonight.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so thank you so much for coming out and for being willing to give some of your time to listen and hopefully learn a little bit about some of the things that are currently going on related to child and adolescent mental health, and also what that means for parenting. And so just by way of introduction, many of you may already be familiar with our organization, with the Antioch Group, but we're located here in Peoria. We do offer counseling services like you were hearing across the age span. And so pretty much any issue that someone might be dealing with or working through, we have somebody, thankfully, we're blessed enough to have someone who usually has experience in that and can work with that. We're also a Christian counseling agency, so for those who are interested in having that incorporated into that treatment, that's something that we welcome and that we're comfortable with as well. So, and you know, I am incoming vice president of the organization and a psychologist there. So I have my hands in a lot of different areas of the business. So I'm hoping tonight, by the time that you walk away, there will be some things that you'll hear that you'll say, yeah, okay, I knew that, I've heard that before. Some things that maybe you say, yeah, I've heard that before, but it was good to hear it again. It was good to have the reminder. And hopefully at least one or two things that you say, I haven't really thought about that before, or that's new. So if we can hit those bases, I will feel like we've had a successful night. Mental health in relation to pandemic we have entered a whole new world as far as not only service delivery, where pre-COVID we were not able to provide telehealth services in large part. We were not able to connect with people through phone or internet. The doors have opened to that, but also the doors to awareness of the need for mental health services have really opened as well. And with that greater awareness, we're finding just an explosion of need for services. And there's a really good part of that people are recognizing, hey, maybe we could seek some support, maybe we need some help with things. It also presents its own challenges for any of you who in the last 2 years have called and attempted to get mental health services. What you have probably found are long waits and not enough providers and those types of challenges. So those are things in the field that we're currently trying to navigate, things that we're facing, and unfortunately things that trickle down to patient and community experience. And so I'm always telling people, minor plug, please do not hesitate to seek the service if you feel like you need it. We're hearing all over, mental health system is overburdened, and that is true. But at the same time, that does not mean that any one person's needs are less important than another. So I always tell people, get on someone's schedule if you think that you might need some help. And even if you have to wait a little bit, sometimes you can get some feedback in the meantime about what to work on until you get to that appointment. But don't talk yourself out of doing it just because there are other people who are also trying to do the same thing. Part of the challenge too is it's a field where providers, if someone decides today, I want to be a counselor, by the time that they are up and going and ready to actually see clients, we're about 5 years down the road. And so being able to infuse the environment with more providers is a significant challenge. But I would also say, as parents of young children, it's a growing field. It is definitely a field where we would love to see your children join us someday. So, as far as mental health among children and adolescents, realistically, and this part won't be a surprise because it's getting talked about a lot more, is that youth mental health is declining over time. And so as I was typing that up, I was thinking, okay, maybe we should break for everyone to hit the bar real quick before we just dive deep into this. But I think it's important to be aware and to be reminded that we are not where we need to be in this area of life at this point. So in Illinois alone, 15.15% of children and adolescents report suffering from at least one major depressive episode in the past year. And we're pretty much keeping pace with state average on that issue. It's, in some areas, we're doing better than other states, and in other areas, we're struggling more. So for us, this represents an increase of really a little more than 0.25%, which actually isn't extreme. However, and that's 1.15% increase from 2019. So we can see that the pandemic really has kind of grown the numbers of adolescents who are struggling, but the nationwide increase over the past 2 years has been 5.88%. So in fact, in that area, we're actually doing a little better as far as the impact of COVID on adolescent mental health. That said, it also kind of says, we were struggling before. It hasn't gotten a lot worse, but it wasn't super to begin with compared to other areas of the country. And so 11% of Illinois youth are experiencing severe major depression. So 15%, at least one episode of depression in the past year, but of that 11% are experiencing severe depression. Sometimes it's very obvious. We see the signs and symptoms, sometimes less so. And then over half of youth with major depression are not receiving any treatment at all at this point. And again, some of that is lack of awareness, even still. Some of that is lack of access, contributing to those numbers. And even those who are receiving treatment, many of them are not receiving consistent treatment for some of the same reasons. So it is still a hole in our care for the children and adolescents in our communities. Also, substance use disorders actually, interestingly, decreased during that major COVID year, which is kind of surprising. A lot of times people think, what? I would think it would have gotten way worse. In adults, there was a worsening. But in adolescents, oddly enough, many of them didn't have access. Because of lockdown, because of less access to peers and small group gatherings, some of the ways in which they were acquiring various substances were not so available to them. But as we have reopened, that number has crept back up again. Not all the way to where it was, but in that direction. So signs and symptoms of pediatric depression and anxiety. A lot of these you all may be familiar with. I always feel like it's important to just revisit them, but not because I think, oh, you've never heard that before. And so I just want to hit the base quickly. That the things that we most often think about are that moodiness, it's more tearfulness, decreased attention. So things where normally maybe they would enjoy reading books and suddenly they don't like to read anymore because they can't remember what they're reading. Lower motivation, we see that in all kinds of different areas. So not only schoolwork, but also housework and chores, things that it's already a tough sell to get them to participate in. sometimes even harder. And even motivation to get together with friends or to engage in the activities that they usually would enjoy. Sometimes we see changes in sleep, and that can go either way. So either sleeping way more than usual, or sleeping way less than usual, and then feeling fatigued even when they have slept a lot. The things that we don't always necessarily think of right away, a lot of times depression and anxiety look like irritability. So when, just like for us adults, when we're stressed or when we're feeling down, we tend to get a little snappier, a little sharper with the people around us. Kids are no different. So you know, that feeling of why are they so angry? Why are they so touchy about everything? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are depressed or anxious, but it can. Changes in appetite, that again, we see that go either way. Either consuming lots more snacking, lots more kind of junk food eating than normal, which again, we're talking about sometimes adolescence where those things already, you know, there's a little more of that and that's normal. But when you notice a change even in your child's normal behavior, changes in school performance, because of course, as attention and motivation go down, usually academic performance goes down with it. Changes in hygiene, this is a big one. If they stop showering, if they start wearing their clothes multiple days in a row, again, outside of their normal behavior, that can be a tip-off that something's different, something's going on. And then this one actually caught us this year, or in the past year and a half. GI complaints. Right around the start of pandemic, my daughter, who's in 8th grade, started complaining of terrible stomach pain. And right away, we thought, oh gosh, it's her appendix. And we took her to the ER, went through all the things. They did everything's normal. They asked her a million questions about how often she poops, which totally mortified her, and probably made her wish she had never said anything about it at all. And, you know, they recommended various treatments, various approaches. Nothing seemed to help. And then there was a point where all of a sudden, one day to the next, it was gone. And even she seemed kind of baffled by it. But as we talked, she started talking. It was actually retrospective, where later she said, you know, I think there was a lot on my mind at that time. I was really worried about some things going on with friends, some things going on with school that had changed since the shutdown had happened. And the interesting part, the blessing part of that, is that now we have recognized that is, and she does too, that is a huge tip-off. If she is stressed about something, even if she doesn't realize that she is, the first sign she gets is the stomach ache. And so at different times this come up again where she's like, oh, my stomach really hurts. And I'm like, what are you anxious about? Well, and then we have a conversation. So it's prompted her learning more about her body. But I think as parents, we also have to start that, you know, we're the first line of defense sometimes when they come and say, my stomach hurts, or my head hurts, Headaches are another big one. Because of course, as we start to carry tension up in our necks and shoulders pretty quickly, it spreads right into our neck and our head, sometimes jaw pain for kids who are tooth grinders when they're anxious. So you're always just kind of looking for things that seem different, that seem off of their norm. And then the big one that most people are aware of is, you know, suicidal thoughts or self-harm behaviors. Those are things that we always take really seriously. Even if something's being said in anger and you know that it's not a legitimate statement, you're not thinking it seems like they're actively, honestly thinking about that, what it says is they're in a lot of distress, even if they would say the words. And so it's worth attending to, even if you think it's more an emotional response than an actual risk. However, for a lot of kids, they don't get to that point where they're saying those words. A lot of kids are really good at keeping a lot internal, or again, it comes out in other ways, physical symptoms or behaviors. So we always watch for those things, but we don't always get them in order to tip us off that somebody is struggling. So, as far as pandemic, just to kind of fill out the picture a little bit, girls did tend to experience more decline in mental health than boys. And there, again, are a few different reasons for that. One of them is that girls, not exclusively, but let's say largely, trend toward internalizing behaviors. So they tend to hold emotion. They're more likely to experience depression and anxiety, where boys are more likely to externalize behaviors. So you get more restlessness, more hyperactivity, more anger and irritability, more sassiness. You can kind of see the change. Girls tend to hold it, and actually that works against them sometimes, because there is a value to venting emotion even when it's not in the healthiest ways. So boys have a protective factor in that. And then girls too, in general, not across the board, tend to be a little more reliant on social networks. And so for them, having those social connections cut off hits a lot harder more frequently than it does for boys. Not that boys are unaffected by it, but it's just different. So when they surveyed adolescents, it was interesting because as parents, as our greatest fears often were around, am I going to get sick? Am I going to get someone else sick? Is something going to kind of disrupt the flow of our lives? For kids, their biggest worry was not being able to see their friends. What effect are these rules and this legislation going to have around my ability to access my network of people? And for kids where there was increased conflict in their home for any number of reasons with their parents, that tended to also hit them harder, which stands to reason, because now all the things that they might otherwise use to kind of distract or to buffer some of the stress of that, they don't have anymore. We're in a pressure cooker kind of situation. So again, it takes a little more impact than it might otherwise. Interestingly, online learning in itself did not seem to significantly affect mental health. However, for kids who struggled with online learning, it did. So for the ones that were able to just kind of click into that mode and do the online Zooms and get their homework done, the ones that are usually more independent workers as it is, they seem to weather it pretty well, the transition. But for those kids who that is not their learning style, or where there were technology issues or access issues, where they couldn't get communication back and forth between them and their teachers, it affected them more significantly. So those issues, and it didn't seem to get better over the course of remote learning. So if there were issues in the beginning, it kind of set the tone for kids as it went forward. Where again, the kids who didn't struggle with it seemed to weather it more effectively. And then, not surprisingly, kids who already had other needs and challenges, who were already experiencing other mental health symptoms before the pandemic, were then much more affected by that as well. Because it's just one more pressure on top of the things that they already were experiencing. And then excessive media exposure, which actually was mostly related to COVID. Like for the kids who were getting a lot of media exposure related to kind of pandemic type issues and situations, they tended to have a harder time. And alongside that, kids who had parents who were frontline workers. Because most often those conversations were happening a lot among homes where parents were still out there working. And so because of that, they were getting more exposure to those kinds of issues. So all of that to say that, yeah, there's been a big impact for kids on a lot of different fronts. There are a lot of layers to it. Now, with that though, not everything was bad. And that's the point where I kind of want to focus as far as looking at a few of the things that went wrong and some of the things that went well, And how do we now apply that to what we want life to look like at this point in our homes? How do we use what we learned during that time? And it makes a really nice pivot point, because as we're coming out of some of this, people are ready for some change. They're ready to do something differently. It's easier to implement a new approach where before it might have been harder. Even in our own business, for a while we had to shut down regular staff meetings and gatherings and things like that. So as we're now getting back into that mode, this is the point where we're looking at, what do we want staff meetings to look like? How often do we want to have them? What are people's opinions about that? Because it's more fertile ground to make a change. So some of the positives, the calendar got empty for a little bit. And as a family with 4 kids who are involved in activities, 2 working parents who both also are involved in various community efforts and things like that, there was a very surreal moment around April, May, when usually we've got softball starting and you know, we're getting toward graduation and the school year closing out, which my husband's a teacher, so that's always a busy time for us as well. It was like, I looked up at our great big wall calendar and there was nothing. And I just thought, this is really weird and really kind of good. And we went for a while like that, and that's not to say that at a point it didn't wear thin. It became overdone. But there was an element of it that felt kind of okay. And some of that was, we actually got to spend some time as a nuclear family. Probably all of you as well experienced holidays where you stayed in your jammies and you watched movies and ate popcorn, and it was kind of okay. Like, not the worst. That family member that you always like, you didn't have to see that one. And so, all of that to say, we don't want to swing too far to where our normal becomes this very kind of insular, isolated thing, but we want to use it. We had more downtime where, you know, we had to figure out what to do. We had family game nights. We had family movie nights. We spent more time outside. One of our kids finally learned to ride a bike. It was super on that front. The downside was, again, as it became overdone, too much downtime, there were some issues that crept in. One of them being that downtime started to look a lot like screen time. And as parents were working, trying to work from home and balance all kinds of things, sometimes that was the thing that was the salvation during the day or as things were needing to get done in other parts of the home, to like, okay, get on the switch, I gotta do stuff. And that diminishes it just a little bit. It was a survival skill at the time, but that's one where, as we look at how do we make this a healthy thing going forward, we have to balance a little bit. So, with that, on the flip side, one of the challenges that came with the pandemic was a lot more social media use and screen time, like a lot. And that was true of kids and adults. Because for us grown-ups, that became a little bit of an escape. And we kind of zoned out into our phones. That was the rise of TikTok. And which now, at least for the foreseeable future, is not going anywhere. And a lot of people just really get kind of sucked into that. So, is social media all bad? No, absolutely not. It's not. It's got good and bad, right? So as of 2018, which the numbers have changed even since then, we can't even keep up with the data, 95% of teens say they have a smartphone or access to one. I know my 8-year-old says the majority of his kids in his class have phones. He does not. And sometimes there are reasons for that, that, you know, go to a lot of different kinds of needs. But 45%, not surprisingly, say that they are online on a near constant basis. And particularly by the time that you add in online learning and all those things, we've got a lot of computer use. And so even when they asked kids, one of the biggest things that kids said was good was that it allows them to be connected to their friends and family. And especially during a time when we couldn't have that face-to-face connection, that was a substitute. We could talk to grandma and grandpa on FaceTime. We could, you could Snapchat with your friends. You could text, all that stuff. And then again, not surprisingly, the biggest negative reported was bullying and rumor spreading, which we all know exists as well in that population. However, along with connection, it does allow kids to find people with similar interests and to kind of connect to things and communities that they wouldn't normally be able to do. And for kids who struggle with some social anxiety or who maybe their interests are a little bit different than their peers, it's open doors for them to find people they feel like understand them. And the hope is always that that's healthy, that that's being done in a healthy way. But there are goods to it. Kids can use their creativity in ways that as adults, like, I have no idea how my daughter does some of the stuff that she does on her drawing apps and all these things, that has been really a positive for her. So we don't want to discount that. But what it comes down to, at least in part, is the amount of time. So adolescents who spent more than 30 minutes a day, which, like, let's say everyone at this point, on social media, were at higher risk of those internalizing problems. And the more time they spend, the higher that risk went in the research that's been done around this. So that's one, again, how do we find a healthy balance in our lives? Another piece that presented challenge was that loss of face-to-face connection. And sometimes, some of you may be finding with your own kids, it's hard to get them to re-engage. Once they've gotten kind of encapsulated in their room and they're using some of these more technology outlets, some of them don't want to pop back out into kind of more typical face-to-face interaction. It's become a bit of a habit for them. Loss of structure. This was one where, again, as it went on, like in the beginning, we were all like, sidewalk chalk, and we're gonna make our hearts on the windows, and I'm gonna clean my house, and I'm gonna exercise. And this was true, adults and kids. And then, like, as it went on, it was like, I don't like any of those things. I don't want to do any of that. And so kids too, schoolwork and motivation went down. I'm sure any of the teachers would attest to the fact that homework started getting later and later. And they were having to chase more to get things done. Meal times. It was kind of like, eat when you're gonna eat. Everybody's kind of snacking around. And then also sleep-wake times. When you don't have to be up, like if it's not a Zoom day and somebody's not there waiting for you to log in, why not sleep in? Why not stay up late? But again, at a certain point, that becomes not so healthy. And it contributes to depression feelings. Part of that is even just access to the light. When light, minor nerd out, when light hits our eyes, it sets off a chain reaction that starts our circadian rhythm and also helps regulate our serotonin, which is our mood-boosting neurochemical. So if we stay up later and later, sleep later and later, we don't get sunlight. And when we don't get sunlight, the circadian rhythm throws off, the serotonin throws off, and there you go. You've got already the seeds for some depression. And then it's really hard to get back into it. especially for those who have a very fragile sleep cycle. Once it's off, it takes so long to get it back on track. Lower physical activity, this was another one. At first, we were gung-ho, and then, I don't wanna. So, that the same played out with kids and adolescents. They got more and more kind of sucked into their media, into their games, into sometimes just like sitting around, and they became less active over time, and also loss of connection with our faith practices. So, you know, as church went to Zoom, that was great, but like, it's not the same as being face-to-face. So like after a while, you kind of talk yourself out of logging in and watching Mass. And then, you know, as church reopens, well gosh, it sure is nice watching church in my jammies with my coffee. And so then a lot of people didn't re-engage going in person either. And we have found in our own family, it's hard to get it back on track. And even with the kids, where they used to be very excited to go, it's been a little bit of a tough sell, especially for a couple of them, to get back into that routine. So, blah, blah, all the bad. I know what's not working, but how do I fix it, right? There's the practical, because we're immersed in, here are all the problems. But it still leaves us wondering, what do we do with that? So there are 100 different places I could go, because there are so many different ways to intervene. So I tried to pick out just like, what's some of the low-hanging fruit that we can grab just to get started with it. And so one of them that stems from one of our challenges is healthy family media use. So guaranteed, in a couple of these things I'm gonna say, you're not gonna love it. Neither will your kids love it. But that doesn't mean it's not healthy. I don't like it and it's not healthy are two different things, a lot of the time. And so this is one of those where I hope, as I'm talking about it, there'll be at least one or two things that you might say, okay, we could do that. I do not expect you to overhaul your entire life. You know, and again, it's hard to dig back out. So lest you hear a couple things, feel like that's too much, and shut your ears off. And then just nod and look very interested, and meantime wait for me to finish so you can leave. I would encourage you just to listen for what sounds like it would fit with your family. So one of these things that we are preaching all the time is to set limits around screen use for everybody. There is actually research out there that if a person has their phone sitting like anywhere in sight, they will look at it and be distracted from what's going on. So if you're enjoying a meal and your phone is sitting over here, you will look at it, even if nothing is going on. It's not ringing, it's not dinging, you will still look over, just instinctively.